When Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man was first announced, fans were hyped. Another Spider-Man animated series? That alone was enough to get people talking. Spidey has always been one of those characters that thrives in animation, so expectations were through the roof. A lot of that hype came from the legacy of past Spider-Man shows. Spectacular Spider-Man is still considered one of the greatest superhero cartoons of all time, and Spider-Man the Animated Series defined the character for an entire generation. So naturally, when a new series was announced, fans couldn't help but wonder, would this be the next big thing? Could it finally give Spidey the justice he deserved after some hit or miss attempts in recent years? People were hoping for a show with strong storytelling, fluid animation, and a version of Peter Parker that truly felt like the webhead they grew up with. They wanted something that could capture the magic of Spectacular Spider-Man, the emotional depth, the character-driven arcs, the high-energy action. At the same time, they hoped for something fresh, a show that could stand on its own 2 feet while still respecting what came before. So when Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man was first announced, it seemed like it had the potential to be exactly that. Marvel initially pitched it as a prequel to Spider-Man Homecoming, making it a part of the MCU. Fans were excited. This meant that it would tie directly into one of the most beloved superhero franchises ever made. The idea of exploring Peter Parker's early days in an animated format sounded like a perfect way to expand his story. Expectations were sky high. But then, just as quickly as the excitement had built up, things got confusing. Marvel announced a change in direction, shifting the show's premise from a Homecoming prequel to an alternate timeline story. Instead of diving into Peter Parker's origin or his MCU connections, the show took a different route, exploring a reality where events weren't quite the same as they were in the films. This shift left many fans scratching their heads. The idea of a Spider-Man series set within the MCU had so much potential. Fans were expecting familiar faces, connections to the larger Marvel universe, and maybe even some crossover moments with other heroes. But then the timeline changed, and it felt like Marvel pulled the rug out from under the fans who had been hoping for something more connected. The result was a sense of confusion and disappointment. For some, the shift in tone felt like a missed opportunity to further explore Peter's role in the MCU, and instead, they were left with a version of Spider-Man that didn't fit into the world they'd grown to love. There was a disconnect between what fans were led to expect and what the show ultimately delivered. The show could have been a true MCU tie-in, but instead, it left fans questioning the direction and purpose behind the change. This sense of frustration only grew when the show's animation style was revealed. When Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man first dropped its preview, the response to its visual style was far from positive. Fans quickly began comparing it to what they had seen in previous Spider-Man shows, but the most frequent comparison wasn't to Peter's animated history. Instead, many drew parallels to X-Men 97, a show that had raised the bar for animation in the superhero genre. X-Men 97 had raised the bar for what animated shows could look like, with its detailed character designs, dynamic action sequences, and overall fluid animation. It wasn't just a trip down memory lane for X-Men fans. It was a visual treat that paid homage to the animated series that defined a generation while pushing the envelope for modern animation. Fans had come to expect this level of quality from Marvel, and it set a new expectation for future animated shows. So when Spider-Man's trailer came around with its more simplified, cartoonish art style, it felt like a letdown. Viewers were hoping for something on the same level as X-Men 97, something that would visually match the MCU's cinematic greatness, even if it was animated. Although What If was poorly received, the animation was amazing, and people wanted that in the MCU Spider-Man too. They wanted a style that felt modern but also fresh. Instead, what they got was an art style that many felt didn't do justice to Spider-Man's legacy. The characters appeared flat, the movements less fluid, and the overall aesthetic didn't live up to the heightened expectations that fans had after seeing X-Men 97. Fans were disappointed, not just because it wasn't as visually impressive, but because it didn't match the energy that Spider-Man's character demanded. This disappointment only deepened when it came to how the show handled the villains. One of the biggest red flags for fans with the new Spider-Man show was how it approached the classic Spider-Man rogues. Norman Osborn was introduced early on, but instead of portraying him as the Green Goblin, his role was drastically different, and he wasn't the only one. Other iconic villains were either changed, sidelined, or reworked in ways that left fans questioning the direction of the show. Spider-Man's villains aren't just obstacles for him to fight, they shape his journey. The way Peter Parker grows into a hero is deeply tied to the threats he faces and the lessons he learns from them. That's why changing these villains so drastically had fans worried. If Norman Osborn wasn't following his traditional path towards becoming the Green Goblin, what did that mean for Peter's story? Would he even face the same struggles that defined him in other versions? For many, this felt like the show was stripping away core elements of Spider-Man's world. It wasn't just about nostalgia, it was about respecting the essence of the character. The concern was that these changes would make Peter's journey feel less authentic, less connected to the Spider-Man story that fans had loved for years. And then on top of that, when you add in the timing, some things get even more complicated. Sometimes a show isn't necessarily bad, it just drops at the worst time possible. That's exactly what happened with FNSM. When it was released, the hype around Spider-Man was already at an all-time high, but not because of the show. Spider-Man 2 on the PS5 was dominating the gaming world. Insomniac's take on the web-slinger had already set a high bar with the first game, and the sequel promised an even bigger, more immersive experience. Fans were excited to play as Peter and Miles, swinging through a beautifully detailed New York and taking on villains like Venom. It wasn't just a game, it was a cinematic experience that made players players feel like Spider-Man. With this, and the recent release of Across the Spider-Verse as well as Spider-Man No Way Home, your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man felt unnecessary. It didn't have the groundbreaking animation of the two Miles Morales movies, and it lacked the high-stakes storytelling of Spider-Man 2. Just from the trailer and clips, it lacked the weight, the buzz, and the excitement that made those projects feel like major events. And timing wasn't the only issue too. Oversaturation played a massive role in the failure of this show. Spider-Man has always been a fan favorite, but there comes a point where even die-hard fans start feeling fatigue. With so much high-quality Spider-Man content dropping back to back, the show struggled to find its place. It didn't feel like a must-watch, it just felt like an option against many others. Then, to make matters worse, the show also suffered from a lack of promotion. For a Spider-Man show, you'd expect the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man to get a massive marketing push. After all, Spider-Man is one of the most popular superheroes of all time. His name alone should be enough to spark interest. But for some reason, Marvel and Disney barely promoted the series. Compared to the past animated Spider-Man shows, the lack of marketing was glaring, and it left a lot of fans feeling confused. It's important to keep in mind that Marvel has 9 projects coming out in 2025, and that's just this year. Shows like Spectacular Spider-Man or even Ultimate Spider-Man had trailers, interviews, social media buzz, everything needed to build anticipation. Even the weaker Spider-Man cartoons at least got some level of promotion to let fans know they existed. But with Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, it felt like Marvel just threw it out there with no real effort to hype it up. There was barely any major trailers, no real engagement with the fan base, and hardly any build up to the release. This lack of promotion hurt the show in more ways than one. First of all, it made it hard for fans to even know it was happening. A lot of people who might have been interested simply didn't hear about it. In an era where marketing plays a huge role in a show's success, failing to generate buzz is basically setting it up for failure. Second, it sent a message, intentional or not, that Marvel and Disney didn't really believe in the project. When a company doesn't invest in properly promoting a project, it makes people wonder if it's even worth checking out. If Marvel wasn't excited, why should fans be? This lack of belief in the show's potential became even more apparent when Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man dropped and was hit with a wave of negativity right out of the gate. The show was bombarded with 1-star reviews on IMDb, with many people writing it off before even watching a single episode. Much of this frustration stemmed from the art style, the changes made to the classic Spider-Man characters, and the confusion surrounding its MCU connections. People also hated the gay characters and that Norman Osborn was made black. The first impression was rough, and once that kind of backlash starts, it's hard to recover. But as more episodes came out, something interesting happened. People who actually sat down and watched the show started realizing that it wasn't bad at all. In fact, it was actually really good. The writing had depth, the action was solid, and the storytelling had a lot more heart than anyone had expected. The problem? By the time word started spreading that the show was actually good, most people had already moved on. That's the frustrating part. A show can be well written, visually unique, and full of great character moments, but once the internet labels it as a failure, that reputation is almost impossible to shake. First impressions are everything, and Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man suffered from one of the worst ones possible. Even if it improved over time, people weren't willing to give it a second chance. I'd argue that the show is genuinely good. Maybe it's not groundbreaking, maybe it's not on the level of Spectacular Spider-Man, but it's still a solid take on the character. Unfortunately, in this age of instant reactions and online discourse, being good isn't always enough. If people decide early on that a show isn't worth their time, no amount of quality storytelling is going to change that. At the end of the day, a lot of recent Marvel projects have suffered the same fate. People went into shows like Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man and movies like Captain America: Brave New World with an extremely negative bias. This was solely due to poor early reactions and bad marketing decisions. At the end of the day, it almost feels like Marvel has no faith in their production. And honestly, this could have been one of the biggest shows in the world. And all they had to do was actually convince people to watch the first episode.